Hello, third graders. I had a great idea that I thought might bring some smiles and excitement to your homes. I know we were just a couple chapters away from finishing the fairy swarm, so I picked it up and I brought it home, and I thought that the best thing to do would be to finish this book. I'm dying to know how it ends because I haven't finished this book yet, and I'm sure you are too. So I'm just going to read the last paragraphs of chapter 17, just so that you can kind of remember where we left off. At this point, the fairies had been captured by the bug guy, and Pearl and Ben were trying to get the fairies back to the factory, to Dr. Wu and Mr. Tabby, but it was too late. And at this point, Maximus Steele is kind of coming for the portal because he needs the fairies for their fairy dust. So Dr. Wu and Mr. Tabby have decided it's time for them to move on. So we are at a point where Dr. Wu is telling us a story, just a little bit of background information about what Maximus Steele is going to do next. So she says, Max and I were working as apprentices to my grandmother, Diamond Wu. We had just finished delivering cold medicine to a leprechaun family when Max disappeared without a trace. We were worried, of course. He'd never taken off before, and we had no idea what had happened to him. Days later, a call came in that the Nemean lion was in trouble. Grandmother and I found the lion in a trap, with Max trying to take one of his claws. Grandmother attempted to reason with Max, but his mind was poisoned with greed. Fortunately, Vinny arrived in the portal and wrestled Max to the ground, trying to help. I opened the trap. The lion lashed out at me. She looked at her hand. That was one of the last times Max worked as our apprentice. So the photo of the lion is going to be some kind of bait, Ben asked? I don't get it. The lion represents a huge loss to Max. It was a creature that I took from him, and he has never forgotten. Now I've taken something else that he wants, the fairies. I wrote a message on the back of the photo. It says, "You can't have them." He will not be able to resist such a challenge. Twanabeth will allow herself to be caught. She will shed enough fairy dust for Maximus to summon the portal. Dr. Wu stood, her voice growing louder as she made the following proclamation. Maximus Steele will come here ready for a hunt, but we will become the hunters. We will defeat him once and for all, and when we do, his days in the imaginary world will be over. Chapter 18, A Steel Trap, and it's spelled Steele, like Maximus Steele's last name. Dr. Wu had masterminded a 4-pronged attack to defeat Maximus Steele. Prong 1, Fairy Strike. As soon as Maximus stepped out of the portal, Dr. Wu would release the fairies and they would distract him with fairy bites. Before her departure, Twanabeth had ordered her fairies to help the doctor. They had agreed. Prong 2, Dragon Pounce. Once Maximus was distracted, Metal Mouth would spring into the air and capture the hunter in his big paws. I don't want to do that, Metal Mouth grumbled, scooting back into a corner. Your pacifist tendencies are admirable, Mr. Tabby said. But, for once, we need you to act like a dragon. Muster some of the ferocity that pulses through the veins of your species. I don't want to pulse, Metal Mouth said. Why not? Think of it as a game of fetch, Ben suggested. Pretend that Maximus is a big yellow tennis ball. Metal Mouth's tail thumped. Oh boy, I'm going to play fetch. Dr. Wu patted Ben's shoulder. Wise suggestion, she said. Prong 3, Net Toss. Mr. Tabby riffled through a crate, then removed a Sasquatch catching kit. Upon seeing the kit, the Sasquatch grunted unhappily and hid behind Metal Mouth. It is not for you, Mr. Tabby said as he opened the kit and pulled out a net. Once Metal Mouth has pounced on Maximus, Vinny and Violet will throw this over his head. I will secure the end so Maximus can't escape. He handed the net to Vinny. Then came the super sad part. The plan ended with Dr. Wu, Vinny, Violet, Metal Mouth, and the Sasquatch and the fairies escaping into the portal. That left Pearl, Ben, and Mr. Tabby to deal with Prong 4, Maximus Steele removal. You want us to remove him? Ben scratched his head. How are we supposed to do that? This part of the plan was worrisome to Pearl. Maximus was a muscular guy, and the last time they'd seen him, he'd carried a big knife. I could call my Aunt Millie. She could take him to jail. I appreciate your offer, Dr. Wu said, but unfortunately, Max hasn't broken any laws in the known world. She took Pearl's hand. For someone about to face her enemy, her skin was surprisingly cool. You and Ben do not have to assist with this plan. You have already been enormous help by capturing the fairies. If you'd like to go home and avoid this unpleasant situation, please do so with my blessing. No way, Pearl said with a stomp of her foot. I'd never go home, not now. This is important and I want to help. Me too, Ben said. Pearl hadn't needed to nudge or encourage him. His expression was resolute. We're staying. Very well, Dr. Wu said, releasing Pearl's hand. Then help you shall. Pearl grinned proudly. They were a team, no doubt about it. Maximus' removal will proceed as follows. Mr. Tabby began to pace. Once Maximus is netted, the apprentices and I will carry him from the building. We will deposit him on the front lawn and release the net. And where he goes after that is none of our concern. Good riddance, I say. He'd better not stay in Buttonville, Pearl said. As long as I am not here, he will not stay, Dr. Wu assured her. But, Mr. Tabby, how come you're not escaping into the imaginary world with the others? Is it because you'll turn into a cat? Ben asked. I will remain in the known world to search for a new location, Mr. Tabby explained. I need to find a home for Dr. Wu so she can continue her important work. Only imaginary creatures are allowed to live in the imaginary world, Dr. Wu said. Imaginary creatures exist under different laws of time and physics. I can visit for a while, but if I stayed there long term, the effects on my human body would be detrimental. Likewise, Maximus can only stay there temporarily. It is another reason why he needs fairy dust. When you find a new home, will you call us or send a letter? Ben asked. Can we come and visit? Pearl imagined a slumber party with sleeping bags for her, Ben, and the Sasquatch. Metalmouth wouldn't want to watch a scary movie, so she'd bring something funny and lots of microwave popcorn. Dr. Wu didn't answer. She looked out the window, a faraway expression settling in her eyes. Perhaps you should take this time to say your goodbyes, she said, her voice hushed. Pearl cringed. It felt as if Metalmouth had pounced on her chest. She didn't like goodbyes. She didn't want to say them. Her heart began to pound. Her palms got clammy. Drat, she muttered. And that was when thunder rumbled. Portal arriving, Violet announced. The switchboard lit up. Violet stuck her headset over her goat ears and pushed a few buttons. The portal pilot reports there are 2 passengers, 1 human and 1 fairy. It is time, Mr. Tabby said. Everyone scurried to the edges of the room. The portal's arrival was a familiar sight to Pearl and Ben. The wind usually began as a wisp, then built into a tornado as the transportation device touched down. But this time was different. It was as if the portal knew that one of its passengers was evil. Lightning bolts hit the roof, causing tiles to fall off. Thunder shook the building, toppling the switchboard itself. Violet shrieked, jumping out of the way. Pearl and Ben clung to each other as hurricane-force wind filled the room, roaring like a Nemean lion. Pearl held an arm over her face, protecting her eyes from the swirling glitter. Everyone, get ready, Dr. Wu hollered. Dr. Wu grabbed the fairy trap, ready to release the fairies. Ben crouched next to Metalmouth in case he needed encouragement to fetch. Violet, Vinny, and Mr. Tabby stood together, the net in Vinny's hands. Pearl didn't know what to do. She wasn't needed until the end of the 4-pronged attack. Likewise, the Sasquatch had nothing to do, so she grabbed its hand. It grunted at her. Glitter was stuck all over its fur like an art project gone haywire. The instant the portal touched down, Twanabeth flew out of the swirling wind and began squeaking frantically. Mr. Tabby pulled his creature calculator from his vest pocket. Have fear, Maximus is here, Twanabeth cried. Pearl didn't want to have fear, but it hit her like a wave of cold water. Ben must have felt the same because his lower jaw began to quiver. The anticipation was almost unbearable. Pearl was so glad her parents didn't know she was about to be a part of a 4-pronged attack. They'd probably get a wee bit upset. Maximus Steel emerged. The wind ceased, as did the thunder and lightning. The portal vanished. For a moment, all was quiet on the 10th floor of Dr. Wu's worm hospital. The only visible movement was fairy dust settling back onto the floor. He looked the same as when they'd last seen him in the Griffin King's den, tall and muscular with a chiseled jaw and short dark hair. He wore a pith helmet, a khaki shirt, cargo pants, and sturdy black boots. A rope and a knife hung from his belt. His eyes darted, taking in the situation. Now, Dr. Wu cried. She opened the fairy trap. The sugar fairy streamed out, a blur of beating wings and kicking legs. Bite him, and fight him, Twanabeth ordered. Leading the charge, she and her fairies flew at their target. To Pearl's surprise, Maximus didn't cover his face or duck out of the fairy's path. Instead, he reached into the pockets of his cargo pants and tossed some items onto the floor. Jelly beans! The scent of kiwi filled the room. The swarm halted. Then, with squeals of delight, the fairies dove for the candies. Even Twanabeth couldn't resist. Maximus reached into his pocket again and pulled out a chocolate bar, which he tossed into the mix. With a happy grunt, the Sasquatch plopped itself amid the fairies and began eating its prize. Prong 1, failure. Dr. Wu whipped around and pointed at a dragon. Metalmouth seemed to have forgotten his role, or else he was too scared to move. Ben gave him a shove. Fetch, Ben hollered. But just as that word shot out of Ben's mouth, Maximus's hand slipped under his shirt and reappeared with a yellow tennis ball, which he tossed to the opposite end of the room. The dragon's tail thumped. Oh, goody, I'm going to play fetch! I'm going to play fetch! The floorboards rattled as he bounded toward the ball. Maximus grabbed the rope that hung from his belt, expertly tied it into a lasso, aimed, and Pearl gasped. It was like watching a train wreck and not being able to stop it. Thud. Metalmouth flipped onto his side, his front paws tied together. Aw, gee whiz, he complained. Prong 2, failure. Dr. Wu turned and pointed at Violet and Vinny. Clutching the net, they rushed forward, Mr. Tabby at their side. Like a quick-draw cowboy, Maximus reached into his back pocket and pulled out a handful of ivy vines. He threw the vines at the satyrs' hooves. Distracted by their favorite treat, both Violet and Vinny stumbled, giving Maximus enough time to grab the net and toss it. He pulled the cord tight, capturing Violet, Vinny, and Mr. Tabby. Violet hit her brother in the shoulder. This is all your fault! My fault! Prong 3, failure. Pearl was impressed. Maximus had come prepared. He'd guessed Dr. Wu's plan, and he'd outsmarted her. But what were they supposed to do now? The fairies and the Sasquatch were eating. Metalmouth was incapacitated. That means he couldn't move. Violet, Vinny, and Mr. Tabby were trapped. Ben's mouth hung open in surprise. Even Dr. Wu looked shocked, her face suddenly as pale as the moon. Maximus smirked at Dr. Wu. It appears you've underestimated me. Chapter 19 is called the fourth prong. So prongs 1, 2, and 3 were failures, but hopefully prong 4 will have some success. Hopefully they can get Maximus Seal separated from Dr. Wu and the rest of her gang, get him to stay in the regular world, the known world, so that Dr. Wu can flee to the imaginary world to keep the creatures safe. I look forward to reading chapter 19 with you soon, and I hope you enjoyed chapter 18. Have a great day.